I salute you all wherever you are. My name is Wangechi Nderitu. This is International Political Economy by Dr. Luke Spiller. So in this video, I will be discussing about the political economy of my country, Kenya, in comparison to our neighbors, Uganda. Both countries were colonized by the British. Kenya was formerly known as Kenya Colony. Kenya gained her independence in the year 1963, December, but Queen Elizabeth remained the head of state until a year later when Kenya became a republic, commonly known as the Republic of Kenya. That's in the year 1964. Uganda got her independence in the year 1962, whereby Sir Edward Mutesa was declared the president. The British had occupied both countries because of the good climate and the natural resources. Both Kenya and Uganda are rich in natural resources. The British captured the herders and the farmers who were occupying the Kenya colony. So they made the people, the natives of Kenya, work on their farms, whereby there was no democracy and there was no rule of law. They also started taxing them and made them pay the taxes to the British government. Through social mobilization, people got together and started to fight for their freedom, and while some also collaborated with the British government. The collaboration led to upcoming of the Mau Mau freedom fighters who fought for the independence up until the year 1963, led by the Kapenguria Sikhs. The Mau Mau uprising in the year 1952 led to a violent campaign which led to a declaration of a state of emergency in Kenya. Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, who was declared the Prime Minister in 1963 and later the President in 1964, was one of the Kapenguria Sikhs who had been imprisoned by the British government in the process of fighting for the Kenyan freedom. Kenya became a one-party state led by Mzee Jomo Kenyatta from the year 1963 up until the year 1978 when his death occurred. The leadership of the country was taken over by Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. During Daniel's reign, the country was operated as a one-party state. There was no democracy. However, in the year 1991, Kenya became a multi-party state. There was democracy since most people were able to form other unions and other parties that could compete with the government and oversee. The first constitution of Kenya was drafted and approved in the year 1963. It was inclusive since it included all the roles and the Bill of Rights for the Kenyan citizens. It also followed the basic structure of having a legislative, an executive, and the judiciary part of it. In the year 2010, there was a change in the constitution through a referendum. This changed the structure from a federal to a unitary system. There were some amendments in the constitution on some of the clauses over the past years. However, in the year 2005, there was an attempt change of constitution, but it was not successful after a referendum was held and majority of the people voted no. It was led by one of the Kenyan leaders called Raila Amolo Odinga. After the referendum failed in 2005, 2 years later there was an election whereby Kenya got into a post-election violence. This affected many businesses and investors. The post-election lasted for a couple of months, and Kofi Annan, who was then the African Union leader, came and mediated the country between the two leaders, who were Raila Amolo Odinga and Mwai Kibaki. This also led to many cases whereby we saw some of the leaders who got arrested and they were taken to the International Criminal Court. Finally, in the year 2010, we were able to change the constitution and a new constitution came up with the devolved government. The new constitution brought about the changes in the system of government from a federal system to a unitary system. It brought about devolution on two levels of the government. So we separated the national government from the county government. So the county government includes the governor, and the country was divided into 47 states. That's from 8 provinces to 47 counties. This brought about the micromanagement of different states, whereby each each state has a governor and a member of county assembly to represent them well. And in addition to that, we also now have the national government, whereby each county has a senator, a member of parliament, and a women representative. The new government also makes it possible for a Kenyan to have dual citizenship. We are able to see the liberal part of the Kenyan government through the new constitution, whereby we are able to come up with commissions like the Salaries and the Remuneration Commission to regulate the salaries of the government employees. Also, we have the independent electoral commissions, which are able to oversee all the elections in our country. Other institutions include the National Land Commission, which is able to oversight and manage all the land in the country. It also brought an equalization funds to improve the basic needs of all the marginalized communities in the country. We'll find that not all parts of the country are well represented. We have some well-developed areas in, for example, around the cities. We have rural counties. Some of them are in the outskirts and in the rural areas, whereby there is minimal development. So the funds helped to improve and develop and bring development to those counties. There has been a significant economic growth in Kenya in between the years of 2015 to 2019 of 4.8%, which has been increasingly. However, in 2020, it was affected because of the COVID pandemic, which was global and affected all the nations. So the COVID pandemic interrupted the international trade, tourism, which is a key contributor to the Kenyan economy, and also the transport. There was a lockdown in between the counties in Kenya, so that hindered movement and trade within the counties. However, the agriculture industry remained as a cornerstone for the Kenyan economy and limited the contraction GDP by 0.3%. In the year 2021, Kenya made a recovery of the economy, and we made a recovery growing at 7.5% GDP, and it's projected to grow by 5.5% in the year 2022. Now, this is despite the uncertainty caused by the Ukraine war, because we get some of our imports from the Ukraine, like the wheat, fuel, and fertilizers for our crops. So on comparing the two countries, Kenya and Uganda, we find that Kenya has a GDP of 110.35, whereas Uganda has a GDP of 40.43. Now, some of the key factors that are almost similar between Kenya and Uganda include the natural environment. We also have social capital with a difference with social capital at Uganda being 48.64, whereas in Kenya it's 52.50. Other things that are almost similar is the investment environment. So for Kenya is at 54.78, whereas Uganda is at 52%. So that's the difference is not huge. However, the difference comes in on some other factors like governance, whereby we find that Kenya's governance is at 45.44, whereas Uganda is at 38.47, and also something else like personal freedom. So Uganda stands at Kenya stands at 54.27, whereas Uganda stands at 44.85. So that personal freedom aspect is because Uganda has got no democracy. They've had the same president since the year 1986 up to date. Like Yoweri Kaguta Museveni has been their president since 1986. He's been coming to all Kenyan inauguration ceremonies, and yeah, that's not a good thing. That shows how there's no democracy in Uganda, so it's a coordinated kind of government. It's easier to do business in a Kenyan environment. It's easier than doing in Uganda. For example, if you look at all factors considered, like the education, the levels of education in Kenya are very good. The systems are good, meaning the people are educated, because we are almost like at 50% education, whereas in Uganda we have 39.02, meaning the level of illiteracy is really high in countries like Uganda. If we look at other sectors like health, health in Kenya, we are at 64% compared to Uganda, which is at 58.17. And the health really determines the human labor, because of course you need healthy people to do your work. Looking at other living conditions, Kenya stands at 47.72, which is higher than Uganda, which is at 44.85. Yeah, the margin is not that big, but it's something. Looking at the economic quality, Uganda stands at 41.37, while Kenyan is at 45.12. Another thing that really creates a difference is the level of infrastructure. So in Kenya, the infrastructure is really trying. Like, we have a vision 2030 that we want to achieve by then, and that's why an infrastructure is one of the key sectors that are focused on in the 2030 vision. So currently we are at 48.02% as compared to Uganda, which is at 37.47%. So now let me go back to the infrastructure. We are focusing on a lot of constructions in Kenya. Recently we just had the construction of an express railway, which an express highway, which connects the city from the airport to the other side of the city. We've also been trying with the bypass, which connects around the city to reduce traffic within the city. So it connects, it goes all around the city. And we also have the standard gauge railway, which connects Mombasa, where the port is located, to the inland part of the country. Now with the SGR, we are able to connect Kenya to other landlocked countries. So instead of using the road transport, we are now focusing on using the trains from the port to reach out to the other parts of the country, like and also outside the country, to connect to countries like Uganda and Rwanda, which are landlocked. So that's an additional source of revenue for our Kenyan government. Other aspects that don't have such a big difference are the enterprise conditions. Although Kenya still stands higher at 56.32%, Uganda follows closely at 51.29%, and investment environment, so Kenya stands at 54.78%, and Uganda stands at 52%. Now, in regards to the investment environment, we've recently seen most multinational manufacturers struggling to maintain their revenue in Kenya and their businesses in Kenya. For example, GSK recently just announced that they will be moving their manufacturing plant from Kenya and closing it, so they will opt for the supply, bringing in of ready goods, but not locally manufacturing them. However, the tech companies, on the other hand, have started to invest heavily in Kenya. For example, this year we just had Google open their offices in Nairobi. Now, this means that the Kenya economy is rising access rates to the internet by a youthful population. So if you look at the demographic rates in Kenya, the highest population is for the young people. The young people are the most in the country, and hence that could explain why the tech companies are investing. So as for the education sector in Kenya, we've seen it's at 49.55%, and meaning half the population is not educated and half is educated. So on the other half of the 50% that's not educated, this is where we find the informal institutions. You'll find the Juakali industry. So Juakali means that they use their hands to make things and construct things using metals like welding, and construct things like wheelbarrows. So on focusing on the formal institutions, we have government institutions like the KEBS, what we call KEBS. KEBS is a Kenya Bureau of Standards, which makes sure that all the products that comes into the markets are standardized. So on focusing on the concrete institutions, Kenya is managed by Central Bank of Kenya, which regulates the flow of cash in the country. Which is also somehow it's also somehow related to the international IMF. So on the not so concrete institutional, or what we'll rather call the fluid institutions, we have the sectors of, as mentioned earlier, the unskilled labor. So this is where you don't have to dress formally when going to work, and the languages that we use. In Kenya, we have two national languages. One is English and the other one is Swahili. So it's a little bit fluid on that end. Economical view, I will look at the some of the exports that we have in our country. So we export tea, which is one of the leading exports and has been for the longest time. We also export flowers to the UK and Netherlands. We export refined petroleum and gold and coffee. So it's surprising how some of the products that we import, we also get to export them. For example, products like the refined oil, we get to export the refined oil. Other products that we export include the palm oil, broadcasting. These are what we import. We import refined oil, palm oil, broadcasting equipment, cars, of course, mainly from Japan and China, India, UAE, Japan, and Saudi Arabia. Some of the exports that we have, we export to Uganda, Pakistan, Netherlands, US, and the UK. So in comparison to our neighbors, Uganda, we export some of the similar products. Like, for example, Uganda exports gold, coffee, cocoa beans. They also export tea and raw sugar. And these exports are sent to countries like the United Arab Emirates, Kenya, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Italy. So some of the things that Uganda imports is also gold. Yeah, surprisingly, that has happened again. Refined petroleum, palm oil, packaged Medicares, and delivery trucks. Of course, this they import from China, and they also import from Kenya, India, and Tanzania, and the United Arab Emirates. If I can describe the state of the country currently of Kenya, the country of Kenya. So we just recently had our elections, and we are trying out the new government, which will come in with the new government policies. They want to try out using the bottom-up economy, and somehow it's still on the process of implementation. So there's not much that can be said, since it's barely a month since the new government came into rule. However, we hope that this new current government will be able to sort out some of the challenges that we have in our country. The first and main thing that eats up our country is corruption. We have so many corrupt institutions, and we just hope that they will be able to fight the corruption. So in conclusion to that, we find that Kenya has a better business environment, so it's a better place to invest compared to our neighbors, Uganda. Therefore, bring all your money to Kenya. Let's develop Kenya, and that's a land full of opportunities. Thank you so much. Kenya hakuna matata.